Good afternoon, everyone. I am Audrey Beardsley, professor in our college. I think I know most of you. This is quite a good turnout. This is great to see. We're 33 people, and now we're 34. So people are still entering the room. But we are talking today. There's another person. We're talking today about the our new student evaluation of teaching. SET is the acronym that we're using, which is the common acronym used across scholarship in this area. In terms of the progress and the processes in which we've engaged as a committee, we have an SET committee. Many of the SET members are here at this meeting today, and so we will lean in on you all when we have questions or whatever that you feel like you want to add to the discussion today. But this work, we've been at this for, Bryan, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's been 3 years.
2 years.
Is it two? Where are you?
Yeah,
Okay, two
2 years.
years. After we got long and short, I was the governance chair, which I think most of you know that, and I recruited Bryan to serve on the governance committee. And the first year, which was 3 years ago, we established a teaching evaluation subcommittee of the governance committee. And so after that, Bryan and I got an internal grant to help fund this research, including some of the research we've already done on what we've established. And so we are 2 years in and probably a year or so to go still. It's been quite a process, and we'll explain some of that today. So, Bryan, do you want me to share my screen and drive, or do you want to share your screen and you drive?
I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Okay. Bryan, why don't you introduce yourself too, if you, just in case people don't know who you are.
Hey everybody, my name is Bryan Henderson. I'm an associate professor of science education. I'm both here in MLFC and I'm also in the Department of Physics. And I'm really stoked to see the turnout because this is a key step in the process we're going to share with you is that we're now at a place where we feel pretty good about some of the piloting that we've done, but we really want to get faculty feedback. We want to share these items with as many faculty as we can. So really appreciate your time in hearing us out. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now. So we're lucky to have Audrey as part of the team because Audrey was instrumental in the development of our existing SET. And so, Audrey, you want to give a little bit of a background on that development and how it's led to what we're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So when I joined the college, that was back in 2002 as an assistant professor. I think I ran for the governance committee maybe a year or two after that. So back in 2003, 2004, we had the governance committee established at that time another subcommittee of the governance committee called the Teaching Evaluation Subcommittee. And so at that time, we were using a 26 item instrument, a paper instrument back then that we would pass out in class and so forth. And we knew that faculty were not happy with the items at that point, and so we knew that there was a need to revise the items. Our understanding at that point was faculty essentially got together and kind of put together a bunch of items that they thought were important, and then they just used that as their paper evaluation instrument for years up until 2003, 2004. And so the governance subcommittee back then started with similar process that we are using now, extensive literature review in terms of the evaluation of instructors and courses as two separate constructs in higher education. And we developed during that time, which was probably about a 4-year process, we actually developed and piloted 3 different instruments. And every time we piloted one, the factor structure, basically the psychometrics of the instrument did not fare very well. And so the final instrument we actually mapped onto a theoretical framework, which was aligned with current thought at that time on andragogy. And that one actually fared very well. And that is the instrument that we are currently using today, where I think we've got 8 instructor level items, and I forget how many course, like 3 course level items, I believe. But now times have changed again. We're 20 years using this, and clearly times have changed also in terms of online learning. And so this instrument needs another revamping. And so the main priority of the current teaching evaluation team is to look at that instrument and to pilot it and to revamp it. And that's the process, most of which we're talking about today. So you can also see here, and I saw Meredith is on this call. Meredith was part of this work with us 20 years ago. And we put together a rules document and all these things. At that time, we were just piloting an online administration of these course about the student about these SETs. So things again have changed, but we were worried then at that time how we were going to keep up response rates and online administrations of the SET, but we did not have at that point the online classes like we do now. At that time, we also put in for a Spencer grant, or more recently, Brian and I put in a Spencer grant for this, which we might do again, but we have to get this instrument done. I think that's good.
Okay, thanks, Audrey. So a lot has changed in 20 years. I mean, we have more than 80,000 online students at ASU now. And so 20 years ago, it might have been a safer bet that if you look at how a class is organized, the various aspects of that class are more or less attributable to the person that is the instructor on record. But we have so many different ways in which our courses are offered now. And in many cases, it's a collaborative effort. Resources are passed from instructor to instructor. Multiple instructors are teaching together. And so we really want to account for multiple teaching modalities that exist in this new age of higher education. At the same time, we want to incentivize greater student response rates. There's increasing data that suggests that student response rates just continue to plummet. We also, if we're going to create new metrics, we're going to also have to think hard about how do these new metrics get interpreted in performance evaluations, such as by the Performance Evaluation Committee. And a case can be made that the student evaluation of teaching might not be sufficient on its own. Some would argue that it's actually a flawed instrument to begin with. And so we want to be more robust, and we also want to complement a revised student evaluation of teaching with a peer observation protocol where we can see classroom teaching or online teaching as it happens. And so before we go any further, we'd be remiss to not give a major shout out to the many members that are a part of this project. And so as Audrey mentioned, when she was the chair of the governance committee, we decided at the end of the first year that we were going to have a teaching evaluation subcommittee. And so I've taken the leadership role for TES. And this is a multi-year project, and it has many stakeholders, and it should, because it's important. As you can imagine, many people have many different opinions about what matters when it comes to teaching. And so while my third and final year of governance is winding down, I remain committed to helping lead this team for however long it takes in order to accomplish our objectives. But seriously, major shout out to April, Sam, Teresa, Tracy, Nicole, Katie, Alicia, Amy, Margarita, Peter, Stephen, Lindsay, Christina, Changan. And then, of course, we have our previous members, Laura, Sarah, Mark, Nicole. And we've also been working with the data strategy team with the college. And so shout out to Michelle Welker and Vikas and Aaron. And then also at the university level with UOEEE. This is the University Office of Evaluation and Educational Effectiveness. We're working with them in particular to try to have open-ended comments be more a part of the teaching evaluation process, which I'll say more about in a minute. So this is the roadmap. So it began with reviewing the literature that surrounded student evaluations of teaching. We then went into the standards of academe and looked at the guiding principles for teaching and had good discussions about what constitutes effective teaching vis-a-vis the guiding principles in our standards of academe. And so then right now we are essentially at 3 and 4, and this is kind of a synergistic process where we've been going through having many conversations. We've had 15 meetings as a committee now. We've had many conversations about the wording of the items, whether the items constitute instructor level or course level or both. And then we have been having interviews with students getting their feedback, and then based on that feedback, revising. And so we want to continue piloting work, which is also going to include getting important feedback from fellow faculty members, which is why we're so appreciative of the great turnout today. Ultimately, though, the SET is not going to be enough. We want to also develop a peer observation protocol to complement the SET. And as I mentioned, if we have these revised metrics, we're going to have to also think about how those metrics get interpreted in performance evaluations. So we face a number of challenges. That's part of why this is a long process, and also why it's important that we have a lot of voices involved in this process. And so you could probably imagine that things have changed from 20 years ago in terms of to what extent the textbook and the various learning resources on offer are because of that one instructor on record, or maybe a team of instructors, or maybe there's a protocol where they essentially have to teach a class as is, and it's more of a turnkey approach. You can imagine all of these different combinations of what constitutes teaching in 2026. And so we've had a lot of very important discussions about to what extent is that really on the instructor versus the course offering more generally. And so lots and lots of conversations about this. We very much invite feedback when we share the questions later in this talk to think about like, is that really at instructor level, or is that more course level, or is it both? And there's no silver bullet as we're finding to a lot of these important conversations. Incentivizing students is also something that we really prioritize. This data, I chose this because it was one of the largest studies I found in the review of the literature. This is about 28,000 students and about 2,000 teachers. And you can see the central tendency here is about 40% for the course evaluation rate, which is not super great, but to be honest, I think we would be happy with this now because indications suggest that now it's more along the lines of 25 to 30% response rate. And so more and more students are thinking, why do I even bother filling these things out? I don't see anything changing. So what's the incentive for me? And so this is definitely something that we are trying to address in this revised SET. Now, again, how are we going to, especially if we have more difficulty in determining instructor level versus course level, how are these metrics going to be interpreted by the Performance Evaluation Committee? This also includes our work to try to go beyond merely Likert type items and also find a way of summarizing student open-ended sentiments. And more specifically, multiple members of our committee and others have voiced that it's honestly the open-ended comments that are much more instructive for them when it comes to reforming their teaching. But currently, we cannot use open-ended responses as part of the performance evaluation process when it comes to teaching. And so I mentioned UOEEE. So we're working with them, who are in turn working with the University of Utah, because the University of Utah is exploring taking student open-ended responses, piping them into generative AI, and having a sentiment analysis summary that breaks down the positive and negative comments that are coming from students so that you have something that is much more digestible when it comes to a performance evaluation. Now, as I mentioned, there's arguments that can be made that the SET is a flawed way of operationalizing teaching to begin with. There's lots of studies that suggest that there are strong and sometimes very strong correlations between SET scores and expected grades, which is to say that the better grades students think they're going to get, the better the SET typically is. And on top of that, there's often a halo effect where a student just has kind of this general sense of like, I like the teacher or I don't like the teacher. If they have a sense they like the teacher, they tend to respond favorably to most items. And you don't really see individual items discriminating much. It's pretty much all like they tend to answer on one side of the answer scale or the other. If they don't like a teacher, similarly, now it's all on the negative side of the answer scale, pretty much for all the items. Now, there's been follow-up studies which have tried to think of, okay, it's one thing that a student is happy if they expect a good grade, but does that necessarily mean that the teaching job has been done? Which is to say, does that mean the student has really learned? And so there have been studies where they have looked at students in subsequent courses. So imagine they take an intro course, say they're really happy, they get a good grade, they have high SAT scores for their instructor, and then they take the next course in the sequence. And what has been found in multiple studies now is that there's either zero correlation or negative correlation, which is to say the higher the SET was in the introductory course, which would say that that means a higher grade because there's a positive association. There's either zero association or negative association with their grade in the subsequent course. So if their SET is up in a negative association case, their grade actually goes down in the subsequent course. So some would argue that if SETs are essentially just how happy students are. It can incentivize some faculty just to make it such that their students are happy. And that doesn't necessarily always align with learning. And so we want to do more than just reform an SET. We think it'd be too radical to do away with it. So we want to do the best job we can of updating it, but we also want to complement it with other metrics. And that was the peer observation that I was discussing earlier. This is still in the pilot stages. We have a couple of different peer observation rubrics where we've gone into classrooms to observe lessons and see to what extent those things are practical and that the operationalization, the data that they generate is going to be useful to a PEC. But that honestly is still in the early stages. And we really are much more. If I go back to our roadmap, we're really between 3 and 4 right now, where we're revising our SET items and we're getting more and more feedback, both from students and now from faculty such as yourself. And so I'm going to pause really quickly because I want to go into the chat room and I want to share with you all
I
the
just did,
link.
Brian. I did
Oh,
it for
thank
you.
you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So in the chat, you'll see the link, which you see here. We're going to review the items that are now in our 4th iteration of the SET. And we've got plenty of time here. So why don't you take at least 5 minutes and review those items? And if we need more time, we've got the latitude to take more time. But I'm just going to give you kind of an overview. The items that you're looking at, we decided that we are going to focus on the immersion modality and the online modality. We were also thinking about doing sync and a hybrid approach, but we find that pretty much the immersion and or the online should get the job done. And then what we did is we started with immersion and we thought about, what are fundamental items in the immersion modality? You're going to see a red tag next to each of those. And we also, remember I mentioned the halo effect? People kind of like the teacher or don't, so it's all good scores or all bad scores. To try to mitigate the halo effect, we've tried to be a lot more parsimonious, which is to say a fewer number of Likert type items and trying to be very careful that the Likert type items are more orthogonal to each other. That is, there's not so much a likelihood that, yeah, if you're going to vote high on this one, then it's probably going to be the other one as well. So the hope is that there's not an inherent correlation between any of the items that we currently have on author. And then the other nice thing about being more parsimonious with our Likert type items is it frees up space for the open-ended comments, which, as I mentioned, we are exploring ways of being able to summarize open-ended comments and make that part of the performance evaluation process as well. So I'm going to shut up at this point, give you all a chance to take a look at those items. I guess I have to say one more thing. You're also going to see green. Green tags are for the online modality. So there's some things that are red in both immersion and online, and some things that are green that are more online, such as the idea of teacher presence. And then you're going to see that some items are kind of a combination of red and green. And this is because they started with the red immersion, but then we modified the wording of it to be more appropriate to the online modality. Okay, now I'm going to shut up. So let's take about 5 minutes. If we need more time, it's all good. And then we're going to have a discussion about these questions that you are going to review now. And I appreciate your time in reviewing them. As you all are looking over these revised SET items, if you wish, feel free to make comments in the document. This is a separate document for feedback. And so if there's any feedback you'd like to share, feel free to do so. However, whatever means in which you'd like to share feedback is preferable for you, including the discussion that we're about to have is totally cool. Awesome. Well, this is going to be the best part. So very much value any and all feedback. And we know that there's not going to be like a perfect silver bullet for any of this. But we're trying the best that we can to try to capture main aspects of instruction without having a lot of overlap to try to mitigate the halo effect. Another thing I hope you can see in how we worded these items is that we're really trying to cut down on what we call double-barreled items, where if you look at the wording, It's actually got a couple of components to it so that it could confuse a student. They're like, well, I agree with that part of it, but not this part of it. And so instead of having examples in the root of the question themselves, we leave the examples for after the wording of the item. So that because you could probably imagine, right? In the examples, sometimes they might agree more than others on different examples. And so we're trying to keep the examples out of the wording of the item itself to try to mitigate for double-barreled items. So how are we doing? Is there anything that we're missing? Do we have any blind spots here in terms of items that you really think we should have on there that aren't currently on offer?
Hey,
Antonio,
Bryan, and oh,
sorry, Antonio has this, I don't know who was just talking, but Antonio, I saw your hand raised.
go ahead, Antonio.
Thank you all so much for the work that you all have been putting into this. My question is less about an item, but more about the preamble.
Yeah.
Uh, so I wonder. I really appreciate the question of like uh, why complete this survey? I'm wondering if there is a question or some kind of prompting to be made about like how we expect people to complete this survey. And the reason why I mention that is because, the research that shows that um, women are more likely to be evaluated based on like what they're wearing, or like people who of color whose knowledges are more likely to be discounted. And because you already have an item around like the inclusive teaching of the faculty member, I wonder if there is some prompting to say that like our college values being inclusive of people's backgrounds and all of that. And so keep that in mind when approaching the completion of the survey. I think ideally I would like to say people are really biased when filling out these surveys. Here's the research, don't be biased, right? But obviously that's not going to fly. So more a matter of like, can we provide like a guiding philosophy, a couple of sentences that hopefully puts them in a more constructive mindset than just, I don't like this person because they had an accent and I don't want to listen to them throughout the semester.
I'm really glad you bring this up. And there's literature on that very issue you just mentioned. Whether or not the instructor had an accent has an association with SET evaluation scores. And so this is really important to keep in mind. And if I'm hearing you right, this is probably something we should include in our preamble, correct? Correct?
That's my recommendation.
That's my recommendation.
I'll take that, excuse me, I'll take that even one step further, Antonio. There's research that indicates that students evaluate the competency and quality of instruction based on the multimedia elements in the course alone. So in one of the studies, they had just lowered the quality of the audio. That was all they did. And the students who were in the version that had the lower quality audio, evaluated the instructor as not competent.
And probably in a halo, right?
I'm sorry, what?
And probably a halo effect as well. There's just one thing that was altered, and yet it probably had a spillover effect.
Yeah.
And about this preamble, so this is one of the things that we're trying to do to get at the declining response rates. And honestly, we're going to have to probably think of more than just give a preamble. I mean, it might be assuming a lot that all students are even going to read the preamble, but it's a start. And I think that this probably should be included in that preamble. I appreciate that suggestion. Just to give you all a heads up, we have this new system, Blue. And so this preamble is going to be the first thing that the students see. And so while we're on this, any other suggestions about the preamble, or perhaps other ideas about how we can incentivize students to have greater response rates for these SETs?
Bryan, I did have a question and a comment about the frequency. Um, if we split the evaluation into two, like course related questions and then like two separate surveys, an instructor level survey, and instead of having students fill out the course related one, for every course for every semester, can we target like certain courses throughout a program that they're taking the course related questions, and then have the instructor geared questions be a totally separate survey?
So the problem with that is the way the Blue system works is that the link the way to get to this evaluation is no longer a static link in Canvas. Now it's delivered by an email. It's automated through the SIS. So if we were to do that and a student is taking 3 classes, that means they would get links to take 6 surveys.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. If a student's taking 4 courses at one
And we
time,
separated these into 2 surveys, they would get links to take 8 surveys.
but what if we didn't survey students in every single course, but instead targeted programs throughout their entire like
I think you,
degree?
OEEE, would have something to say about that.
Okay.
That's
And I was
just a
just
guess.
asking as a new
No, it's
joiner
Meredith might be able to speak to that.
curiosity to increase the frequency because I know students they do ignore the surveys because they get so many and they're lengthy, they're at the end of the course. Have we thought about delivering it like at midterm?
I mean, we've talked through, Nicole, like a multitude of these issues. Here's another issue to consider. Any number of students don't use their ASU email, so they would never see the link to these surveys.
Nicole, these are really good questions, and it also gets into the thorniness of instructor level versus course level. We're having a lot of difficulty with that. With a lot of courses now, it's much more of a gray area to what extent the instructor on record is actually responsible for various aspects of the course. Um, that being said, so also know that some of our committee members did a pilot a couple of springs ago where they had the students use course time to take the evaluations. And simple preface, like, I respect your time. I know you have a lot of these, and so I don't want you to have to take any extra time. I'm going to give you some class time now to fill out these evaluations. When we did that, we had about 90% response rate.
And
Were
Brian,
those immersion classes, Brian?
That's the thing. That's the thing. They were immersion
Yeah.
class
Um,
or synchronous. And so the asynchronous thing, right? I think you're going to have that extra credit tag.
I think one thing that has worked because I've really struggled with trying to get online students to fill it out. And I really like in the preamble how it addresses what we do with the surveys. I think even instructors can maybe a suggestion to instructors to take it one step further that I've seen work is giving a personal example of how you've used it. So not just saying I use this to make decisions, but saying in the past students wanted more of this. So this is an example of what I did with it when you send it out. I feel like that has helped some of my students realize that we really do care and we really do read everything and then make changes. When we make that more concrete for them of what that actually looks like, they seem to fill them out more.
This also sounds like something we should add to the preamble. I like it. Thank you for sharing that.
so I don't, if people are raising their hand, I think I cut somebody off. Nicole, was that you from like 5 minutes ago?
Yeah, I was putting my comment in the document, but I'll say it now because I came fashionably late and I have to leave a few minutes early, but I didn't want to miss the conversation. I'm just wondering on the open-ended part, if there's a way to give them students an idea starter versus just saying, if you have any extra feedback, give it here. Because in reviewing these when they come in, most of the extra feedback is that somebody was super fantastic or somebody was super awful, but there's nothing in the middle.
Yeah.
And so if there are things we would want to know, if there is a way, and Audrey and Brian, this is where your expertise will come in and like how to frame things, to put things so there are neutral ideas to give them what does additional feedback look like? If something in the top questions weren't covered, here's a place where you could tell us these extra things. I'm thinking about our undergrads who really use it as an opportunity to tell me, and Juliet, it's just because you're in the middle of my screen, Juliet is absolutely amazing and the instruction was the best she ever had, or she was horrible, she didn't respond to email, she couldn't get an answer to any question, but there's no middle ground.
Yeah.
And so
we
idea starters might be helpful for them.
Yeah, and we've gotten more and more terse with that open-ended STEM. And it was because we didn't want to push students in a certain direction, but I totally hear what you're saying. We need to think about examples that are general enough that it's not going to bias them. However, I
Yes.
do think part of what you're suggesting is a more general biasing effect. If we are going to have only 25 to 40% response rates, I sometimes jokingly call this the Yelp model of evaluating teaching because it's essentially like
Yeah.
it's people that are either really, really, really happy or really pissed off, right?
Yeah.
And then if they're really pissed off and you give them space, like look out. And so that's part of it, I think. But that being said, we've definitely been tweaking with the STEM and the open-ended question. And I
Yeah.
appreciate the feedback on that. I think we're going to need to continue to tweak it. And I also think as things develop with this UOEEE and University of Utah sentiment analysis thing I was talking about, we might also need to keep that in mind in terms of how we word that open-ended item.
Yeah. I don't know. I would appreciate like just appreciate more guidance if we can figure out a way to do that. That's in a neutral sort of approach on the ideas for them. Um,
We can certainly like you mentioned this a minute ago, we can certainly be like, in addition to the items that you just answered, are there any other things you'd like to share about this course? Something like that.
or your learning, I don't know, learning experience, learning environment. I don't know, but just something a little
Yeah.
more to give them things to talk about. Otherwise, it's going to be what you were talking about with the Yelp experience. They were
Yeah.
fabulous or they were awful.
Yeah. By all means, anybody have any suggestions for the wording of the open-ended or any of the items? By all means, please, please, please leave a comment in the document.
All right. But thank you, Bryan and Audrey and your entire committee who's been working on this. This is amazing. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And before we proceed, I'm raising my hand and also unclicking mute at the same time because I have power and control. So this is super fun. But back to Nicole's comment, I think that the committee, Bryan, or and all of us that are here, I think we should discuss this, the separation of the instructor versus course. So a long time ago, again, I'm aging myself this whole meeting, we had this initiative called the T-Prep initiative. And it was basically evaluating our programs, especially in what we're now Division One. I'll just, I forget the acronym. So we could consider something like that because we might not have to be evaluating our courses every semester. It might be overkill. And so I think we should discuss this, what Nicole offered as a consideration, because we could kind of possibly revert back to like a T-prep model that we used to have and think about this a little bit differently and these instruments just to the instruction of our current facilitators and instructors. So let's just put that on. Let's add that to our agenda for our next meeting if good.
Thank you, Audrey. I appreciate the consideration for opening that up. I guess to make it concise, like evaluating the instructor, like every course that they teach, but choosing core courses throughout a program that they're completing the course level, like separating the two. I hope that's what I was conveying.
Yeah, no, that's right. Because we've always, over this 20-ish year period, we've always considered these two different constructs, teaching course. But we might be able to your point, we might be able to reframe our thinking around that in just unique and maybe a little bit more innovative ways. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. And then just because I had the thought, obviously instructors need to have feedback on like I guess like the courses they teach. So maybe like sporadically, but intentionally, like a instructor gets one where they're hitting both, like every 2 years or something. Does that make sense? Like if I, for some reason, didn't teach one of the core courses that are being evaluated on the course, itself and not my ability as a teacher, like somehow weaving that in so that it's hitting every instructor.
So I had an issue with Antonio's comment was what I was taking issue with. That is typical. That is a problem for me. If an instructor says, "Oh, I'm just an ancillary instructor and I get a shell that's ready to go," but they don't take an active role in that and aggressively teach them course materials, and they should be actively participating. So this issue that, "Oh, I just get a shell and I just like give feedback," No,
I
sorry.
agree,
Not
but I think that's a
no,
problem
yeah,
of
no, I
of
understand that.
our
No, I get that. But I've heard other people in meetings say, "Well, I really don't do anything because I got to shut." Well, that's your problem, is you're not doing anything because you're just leaving it as it is.
In some cases, though, they are like, for instance, I have colleagues in the School of Earth and Space Exploration that are a part of a large pilot right now where they literally cannot modify any of the problem sets, any of the exams. The only thing they have control over is communication. And I think we all would agree we need to put onus on the communication, but that is only a subset, right, of the SET.
Yeah, it's a subset of it, but I'm going to argue that that's the crucial part of asynchronous courses is developing that social presence through that communication piece. That's what makes or breaks asynchronous courses.
Can I follow up on that with a related comment about the actual items that are intended to measure instructor expertise?
Please.
So in the immersion version, the first question is very directly, it seems, capitalizing on instructor expertise, whereas the corollary version in the online is focused on instructor feedback, which is actually, again, not necessarily going to strike the same chord in terms of the expertise of the instructor. So the construct being measured there might be inconsistent across formats, and in some ways is relegating the online instructor to a lesser presence, as I think what Steve is trying to get at, which is a misnomer in my view. So in other words, in the face-to-face section, the items measuring instructor expertise and clarity of explanation, but then the comparable item in the online is solely focused on instructor feedback, which might reflect a different aspect of teaching, not necessarily capturing content knowledge.
Totally hear you. That being said, they're not one-to-one.
Right. I recognize they might not be, corollary items, but there isn't an item in the online version, in my view, that captures instructor expertise.
And so the idea is that it was instructional resources. If you scroll down a little bit in the online,
but instruction is much more than the ability to point students to resources in an online environment or in an in-person environment.
No, it's not pointing them to the resources. It's the resources themselves and how the resources convey the concepts and the material.
Okay, fair enough. I would ask a relook at the wording of that item to better capture the instructional expertise that I think our online folks bring. I'm not an online instructor per se, but I recognize the expertise that my colleagues possess and the effort and work that they put into the instruction in those courses. And I think that an item could better capture that.
I'm glad you mentioned it, because do you notice how the instructional resources has both red and green? We used to have a one-to-one correspondence instruction for both immersion and online. But the idea is that with online, you typically have the instructor on record providing instruction, but then there's additional instructional resources like videos that the students can click on. But if there is a parallel, it's the instructional resources for online vis-a-vis instruction for immersion. It's not feedback, because feedback, that's the order that they appear, but the order is not necessarily that this is the parallel for one modality versus the other, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'm going to go for booze now in terms of some of the problematic issues that are forthcoming with feedback, not here today, but will be within the next 12 to 18 months, which is that we're not going to have an alternative, a lot of us. And if you want to talk to me offline about what that means, that AI grading is going to take a larger role. So a larger part of our feedback is going to be coming from AI as we, leverage the upcoming Ignite AI tools that Canvas is integrating into their thing, as we leverage external tools like Timely Grader, as our assignments have to become more complex and multi-layered to become AI resistant, making them much more burdensome to grade. All that stuff is going to eventually add up to a lot of the feedback we give to students being completely or partially composed by your friend and mine, Chatty McGPT. Or insert your AI model here.
The feedback might eventually become more of a course level than instructor level.
But now it's not only do students have to evaluate our feedback, but they have to consider whether that feedback came directly from us or from a large model or an LLM.
Yeah, not just feedback, but like engagement broadly, right? Because I mean, as programs expand, and I want to be really clear because like I actually have a separate question, but the engagement as a whole is shifting when we think about Steve, like what you guys have done in the LDT program, deliberately bringing on your AI mentors as part of the instructional coaching team and engagement to increase a way for students to engage with more than like to have a robust set of
So we're calling them a
supports.
second tier,
Right. Like
a
the
second
question of
tier of AI
engagement
faculty.
becomes, yeah. And so I think
They're
that, I
our
mean,
second tier faculty.
right. My question, I want to kind of go back to what Juliet said, and I don't want to jump the line if there's a line, but I do want to connect to what Juliet said, and I dropped it in the chat. The construct about instructor versus course is still really interesting to me around separating these things.
Yeah.
Just, I'm trying to think across the whole college, right? So 80% of our enrollment, over 80% of our enrollment in the college is online. And so of course, I'm going to advocate that we not approach that with a deficit model that, like, I think we should start with online and then also think about how that extends to other spaces. But the other question that I had related to that is that in our immersion courses, we've had this course coordination model for years where people are collaborating. And I love that you have worked to address that teams of people are coming together to design sets of materials that then multiple sections are using in immersion situations as well. And so it's an interesting then extrapolation that in immersion courses in many situations in our college, it's also not the instructor who has sole ownership for the resources. And so how to not overextend this separation of course versus instructor based on modality is really challenging. And I wonder if there's a way or just future discussion to be had about potentially bringing those spaces into closer alignment to address some of what Antonio and others have said about like hybrid and sync and these other things, synchronous versus asynchronous. I'm going to acknowledge that complexity. And how do we align in meaningful ways without diluting, I think is a challenging question that you all as a committee have had to grapple with, especially the way this college has shifted so much to this people coming together to design across all modalities, and which I think has been a hallmark of what the college has done over the years, while also still trying to honor the expertise of individuals. I don't know that I have a question. I think it's like a future point of discussion as you continue to think, because we're kind of the course versus instructor questions.
Yeah.
Separates rather than realigns. And I really like what you've done about trying to line them up. And I think it's about the attribution to course versus instructor that I think is worth additional discussion about whether we're making assumptions about who owns, who has agency in each of those spaces, I guess.
So you point out one of the things we talk about the most in our meetings.
Okay, thanks.
And if you look right now, there's an asymmetry between the number of course level and the number of instructor level items across modalities. That in itself could present complications when this eventually gets to PEC evaluation, right? Part of why I don't know that there's a silver bullet to any of this is that for pretty much any of these items, you could probably find an example or probably many examples of how in some cases it's an instructor, in other cases they inherited it from other instructors, and in other cases it was a combination of instructors. It's complicated. I honestly flirt with the idea of just doing away with the distinction. But I don't know if that's the direction we want to go. But I definitely welcome any and all comments on this whole, issue of course versus instructor level, including in the document. Do you think we have it wrong? One of the next steps is to share these items with program coordinators to get a sense of the instructor versus course level distinction. But it's a thorny issue.
I do want to commend the amazing work that has happened. Like, I really, really appreciate the thoughtfulness, especially at the beginning of your presentation, to talk about the complexity of this in like not just where we are as a college, but where ASU is, but like just where higher ed is. This is really complicated. And so thank you, everybody, because there isn't a silver bullet. I want to fully acknowledge
Yeah,
how
and
complex and
there's
hard this
honestly
is.
times where there's honestly times where it's like it's going very slowly. Like we've met 15 times, but it probably should be going slowly because we have lots and lots and lots of voices, and it's really important that we have as many voices as we can in the college as part of this because this is going to become our new teaching evaluations. So.
Yeah, and there are complications at every level. Every time we turn around, we hit something else. In the middle of our meetings, I don't know, Brian, would you say about 7, 8 meetings through, they changed from whatever the old system was called to blue. And, as now speaking like as a technologist, blue is nice. It works much better than the old system, but it's still structured around a 20th century model of evaluation, which isn't going to work for us.
Let me add something in real quickly. So while we've been having this conversation about this course versus or alignment with instructor, these constructs, I looked in the ACD manual. ACD stands for the Academic Affairs Manual, and that's ASU's interpretation of the Arizona Board of Regents policy. And that's ABOR. And so in ACD, we are officially required to have an instructor evaluation and a course evaluation. So it looks like we're going to have to stick with what we have, but also work with what we have based on the conversations that we're having right now.
Would love to, and I agree with Meredith. I commend the committee I know you guys have been working really hard. I would love to see, especially for the online one, an expansion of the instructor specific. I made a couple of comments in there, thinking about the ultimate use of this data. So we've got faculty associates, for example, and co-instructors who are receiving these course evals. So their own professional development. How can they use the answers to these questions to improve what they're doing? Engagement, to Steve's point, for example. And then also the course coordinator level, right? So making sure that our course is still meeting the needs of our learners who are out there, even if we're not the instructor touching that course in an online format. I would just encourage just a little bit more thought with the end game in mind of not just the PEC, but professional development and that sort of thing.
I also want to comment back to Jill's
things, which will be later in the process.
I also want to comment to what Jill said in the chat. Jill, this is something that we struggle with, this question every meeting.
Yep.
And this is another one of those complications. It's compounded, by the way the software works and the rules they've set up. As a program coordinator, even when students get it right, I have no idea what the failings, we'll say failings for this example. I have no idea what the failings of my co-instructors are because I am not allowed to see them. And that's just as far as I'm concerned, as a program coordinator, that just makes the whole thing irrelevant because then I can't act and improve the program.
I think that's an excellent point, Steve. Thank you.
An additional complication. Blue is set up such that the student actually gets to choose who their instructors are. And if there's multiple instructors, then there's going to be multiple different surveys that pop up. But we can probably imagine there could be confusion sometimes from the student side of things, who their instructors are and who's behind the class that they're taking. We're running out of time, and so I want to make sure we get to the next steps. Audrey?
Yeah. So I just want to comment on one comment that was just recently made about increasing the number of instructor level items. We've toyed with this a lot. The problem is the more items in general that you add, the less useful the items get. And that is because of the halo effect and also severity rater errors. And so we have to really, it's a negotiation that we constantly have to keep in mind, especially when our participants, who are students in this case, don't differentiate because the more items that are added, they stop differentiating in terms of the types of things. So we're trying to get a happy medium here. And so this is all still in play. But the last comment, and it's 1 minute left, you can read the slide. So we have other pilots, we have other reviews, like Brian said, with program committee members and so forth. We're continuing to take this in a very careful and slow and careful manner, and then review by full faculty. So once we have the items done and piloted results, final tweaks as based on the data, et cetera, we will come back to the full faculty for a full review. And then the faculty have to vote this in as per our bylaws. And so we kind of know what that means based on recent votes in the college, also when we have elections and so forth. So this will be something that will look like that in terms of an official vote of all voting eligible faculty members across the college. And then the final step in this, and we don't know how long this might be, but a year, 2 years, the final step will be subsequent edits of the bylaws and so forth to make this official and approved by Carol and approved by the vice provost, the provost office. So that's pretty much it. We are out of time. But do comment on the document that we have still open, or you all should still have open on your computers. Feel free to follow up with any of us, especially Bryan and me, on any questions that you might have, things that you might think of after the fact, whatever that might be. And we will continue to do our best to keep you posted as we proceed as a committee.
Please, please, please share any comments, questions, concerns in that document, or if you don't feel comfortable in that document, however you might feel most comfortable. We very much value your feedback. We want these reformed teaching evaluation metrics to really reflect the faculty at large. I also posted, if you're interested, we have the notes for every single meeting on my education hub if you want to go through that. And we got a pretty big party. If any of you want to join the party and help us out, the more the merrier. So please let me know if you have any interest in that as well.
Let me
I
add.
like to think that we're. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, let me add one more thing really quickly before we close. And Jeannie can attest to this too. The University Personnel Committee is also highly encouraging people to do peer observations or whatever types of observations of your practice, especially if you're going up for a review, a promotion review or a promotion with tenure review. And so in the meantime, while we have these protocols, reach out to us if you want to pilot or help us work with these protocols that we're working with. If not, you still should really consider thinking about letters and letters from who is going to be observing your classroom and so forth, because that is another evidence of teaching that the university committee is increasingly valuing. So
thank you all for your time.
Thank you all.
Have a great weekend. I guess it's start of spring break.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So have a great spring break.